Welcome to the Eyes Up Mindset podcast, where we explore what it means to grow daily and find our best in every aspect of life.
Good afternoon out there, or good night, or good morning, whenever you are listening to this and joining the Eyes Up Mindset podcast. We appreciate you. And speaking of appreciate, Jamie Wagner, my co-host and my friend, I'm John Shirkey, here with you today. Jamie, I missed you, man. We just had a pretty big milestone that we usually get to share together. And because of kind of the time of life and the season of life, we had to miss out on that this year.
Yeah, it's a bummer. Me and another one of our, actually David Larson, who was on the podcast episode 5, 6, somewhere in there, MD down at Mayo Clinic here in Minnesota. Usually 5 of us get to go together to South Dakota deer hunting, and it's this time of year, early December. And just because of different circumstances in life, neither of the 2 of us got to go. And so it ended up being the three of you guys. And we certainly missed that opportunity. It's fun to kind of be there vicariously via text message as you guys are talking about where you're going to hunt and where you're going to sit and kind of all the happenings, but also not the same to not be there for sure. So disappointing, but for the right reasons. I think, David and I both missed out. So
if you're listening out there, this is not going to be a hunting podcast, just so you know. Don't worry we don't really care if you're hunting, pro hunting, anti-hunting. It's not a hunting podcast, but it is a big thing in our lives. Like, we look forward to it. It's a time for us to connect. And especially me, I've moved kind of frequently in our friendship and don't always live in the same place. And so the times that we do get to spend together are incredibly important to me and incredibly valued, just like lots of people right now. And, we kind of talked about what is this episode? What is our conversation today? And it's a little bit looking back at some of those things, some of those opportunities we either took advantage of or didn't this last year.
Yeah. And in all honesty, like, we've all had things we've had to miss as a result of this. And it's been frustrating in some ways. It's been sad. I think that was one emotion I was certainly feeling this weekend. It was sadness. And I think that's something that, men in our culture are not allowed to say. It's interesting because with my wife and I, like, our default emotions are very much the standard for men and women in our society. Mine is anger and frustration, and hers is sadness. And it's viewed as okay for her to be sad, and it's not viewed as okay for me to experience sadness and, like, to say that openly and to say it out loud. But you're absolutely right. It's one of the things that we value deeply, and not because we get to go hunting together, but because we spend 4 or 5 days together in community, in this deep kind of connected community. And really, sometimes it's really hard and really challenging. And I can remember David coming back from, I don't know, a 14-mile walk or so. I mean, I don't know what, nobody ever knows what he's doing on our hunts, but he just, like, his body couldn't regulate temperature. And so it's like, I'm taking off all these layers because I'm sweating hot. And then all of a sudden, a half hour later, it's like, I'm freezing in here, turn the heat up. Like, you just had expended so much energy and done this challenging thing. And it takes so much of you. And that really is connecting. Like, that moment where we get to see each other kind of at our best and at our worst. And it's this amazing opportunity. It's not about the hunting. It's about our time together. And for that to be taken in some ways, it was a choice, obviously. And I think that's really important for us to highlight in this conversation, is it was a choice. It was my choice to not go. And for the sake of, safety and family and all these different things, we chose to not go. And that was a choice. But in some ways it felt taken. And I think that a lot of people are feeling that and experiencing that right now. And when we look back on the year of 2020, it feels like something has been taken from us, when in reality, we are faced with new and different choices because of this season and the situation that we find ourselves in. And that might cause some sadness. It certainly did for me this weekend.
Well, I think incredible point about the taken or intentional choices. There's a lot. If you're on social media right now, there's a lot of people out there saying, "Let's get to 2021. How do we just get rid of 2020, or that's so 2020, or fill in the blank." Right? You've all seen it. You've all heard those statements, and as we were talking again about what we wanted to talk about today, it was like, well, if we spent that this whole time and we didn't take advantage of the opportunities we had, yes, we had things taken from us. You live in a state where your governor shut everything down multiple times, right? And you didn't have opportunities to go out and do things that you normally might do, or it had to be different. I live in a state where I lived in South Dakota where nothing got shut down. And then I moved to Montana where it was kind of a mix between South Dakota and Minnesota in terms of regulations. But the reality is this: if you spent the last year making excuses about not getting to do things or being sad about not, and not that you couldn't be sad about missing the hunt, but if you spent the last year, you missed out on a ton of stuff, good, bad, right? There's a lot of stuff that happened. And to just say, "Hey, we got to move forward. Let's get out of this year." Well, I got news for you. I wrote this down in my notes. Like, just because it goes to January 1st, 2021, it doesn't mean everything's fine. Everything's back to normal.
Well, and we've been working on developing a curriculum and more about that next week. But one of the things we talked about is this reality that action is required, right? To make meaningful change, action is required. January 1st, 2021, nothing changes but the date on the calendar. That's it. You then also have to choose to make a change. And what's real is something you just said convicted me a little bit. This weekend, I had some frustrations, some feelings of bitterness or anger or resentment or sadness that then crept into these other pieces of my life where I missed an opportunity to do something cool with the people that were here and now. And when we look back at this year from kind of an eyes up mindset perspective, right? So much of the conversation is how do we get back to presence, to now, to being aware of what I'm dealing with in the moment. And my frustration didn't serve anyone. My sadness didn't serve anyone. It's okay to feel those things. It's okay to be engaging in those things and to realize that that's the thing causing that behavior. And I think that's really important. And we need to allow that from the men out there to say, "Hey, I'm sad right now." And we need to allow that from the women out there also to say, "I'm sad and I'm not dealing with this terribly well." Okay. Okay. Let's find someone we can share that with. Let's acknowledge that that's true and then come back to the moment and say, what can I do about it? What is the action that allows me to move forward next? Because just the calendar turning isn't going to do it. It's not enough. You have to move also. You have to take a step.
Well, and this reminds me of an article I read. It was about retirement, which I'm not necessarily near retirement, but I was reading this article. And it was talking about how your priorities don't change. Your perspective doesn't necessarily change just because you retire, right? You still are going to value the things and spend time and money and energy on the things that you kind of already do. So if you wait until you put everything off until I retire, right? I'm going to get in shape when I retire. I'm going to travel when I retire. I'm going to do fill in the blank X, Y, and Z. The same is true of right now. 2021, I'm going to get in shape. 2021, I'm going to spend more time with my family. I'm going to read more books, whatever it is. Well, if you don't start those habits, those intentional behaviors right now, that action you talked about, right? Then you're not necessarily going to do it then. You have to start building those action steps right now.
And one of our good friends who we work with, his team, challenged or put a question out into the Facebook group, and is what have you been working on recently? What have you been doing? What challenges have you been willing to take on recently? And I had that conversation kind of come up, and I had to look back and say, I did for 6 months, from March until September, I did some really cool things. But then September hit and some of that stuff just faded. And it was that slow fade that we've talked about on the podcast before. Is, I had a goal to read 104 books this year. Well, I was at like 70 come September. I'm currently at 74, right? I haven't read. I was reading all the time, right? But then circumstance changed, situation changed. I started to make excuses. I didn't carve out the intentional time that I needed to read. Now, some of you might say 74 books, that's a lot still. And it's a cool goal, right?
So do you ever, so you said that earlier and I was thinking about this. Did you ever think about adjusting your goal? A few months ago, you guys decide you're going to sell your house, you're going to move. You just got done renovating a house, which you're in and is
we're not all the way done.
Still in process, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But did you ever think about adjusting that goal? Because I heard you say earlier, I failed at this thing because I only read 74, or I'm at 74 right now. And I mean, I know you can read fast, but you're not going to get to 100 in the next, 15 days or whatever it is.
No, not a chance.
But did you ever readjust? Because that's something that I think we talk about, having to adjust and say, hey, what is my new goal? Because that one isn't necessarily realistic. It stretches me too far.
Well, I think this is an interesting insight into the conversations that we wanted to have the podcast be way back in May when we started this thing. We wanted to let you guys see some of how we challenge each other. And this is absolutely a thing that John challenges me with, not just when we're talking on the podcast. This is a real question that we would have any context, right? And I think the answer is, and this might ring true for some of you, I get so caught up in the big goal that when the big goal seems to become unattainable, I actually just shrink from it. I just remove myself from it. I would rather not assess it and change it than to just like let it drift away slowly and not have to acknowledge it anymore. Right. It's, for months, I would update how much I read every day, how much I played on the guitar every day, how many push-ups I did every day. There was this kind of challenge that we talked about where every day I was noting it and writing it down. And as soon as I stopped writing it down, because I was doing other things, I kind of then pushed it even farther out, right? And I didn't reassess. I didn't take responsibility for that thing and say, yeah, now's the time. And I think that this is true of many of us. I don't think I'm alone in this reality, is that as soon as I stop paying really close attention, I actually want to push it about as far away as possible so I don't have to acknowledge it. And reassessing that goal might admit that I didn't reach the thing that I wanted to, and I still may have failed. And again, I think when I look at it more broadly, I played 100 hours on guitar in 2020, right? And I can do things with a guitar that I could not do when this year started. That's an unbelievable success, actually, right? In my context, because I'm not a great musician, but I love doing it, and it's really meaningful to me. I read 70 plus books this year, and I don't know what that final number is going to be. I'm in a couple right now, hopefully can finish a few more. But a couple weeks ago, maybe a week and a half ago, I said, okay, 75, let me get to 75. And I've since read, one whole book, and I have another one in progress and another one that I just started. And it's like, okay, so I think I'll get to 75. So that was the reassessment, but it was too late almost to really make it continue to keep progress happening, right? Instead of 100 pages a day of a book, I could have gone to 30,
Yeah. No, but I just think, the title of this podcast is Good, Bad, Next, right? So again, when you start to focus on the bad or the failure or the letdown of I didn't get to 100, right? For me, this last 6 months, I spent my goals were around getting in better shape, push-ups, and then also reading. And I didn't get to those goals, right? And I need to reassess. Now, I can spend time feeling bad about that and saying, you know what, all my circumstances didn't allow me to reach those goals. But the good thing is this, I started doing push-ups again, and I hadn't done push-ups since I played college football 10 years ago, 15 years ago, almost, right? And I started doing those, and I didn't have confidence in myself to even, partake in some of the exercises that I now am doing. Did I reach the goal that I wanted to get to? No, right? Not necessarily, but I made progress. And that's the good part, right? And that's the playing guitar for 100 hours. You made progress. You can do things now that you weren't able to do then. And so then the question is what's next, right? So are you focusing on the good things that came out of this last year or this last 6 months or whatever time frame you choose, or the bad things, the challenges, the missed opportunities, the missed relationships? And then I think the question is what comes next.
And that's ultimately what allows progress. I think the good can be motivating. The bad can in some ways be motivating. The good can be sometimes like I'm going to rest on this and say, hey, look at this thing that I can do. And that's actually a negative when we focus too much on look at all this stuff that I can do. And, and the bad can also be negative where it's, but progress happens in this thing that we say all the time. It's in the step, it's in movement. It's not just take action, it's actually move towards that thing, create positive steps forward. And we might take some negative steps. That's okay. But for me, I think that thing that you just said, what's next, is so, so powerful because it doesn't take, so many people wait till January 1st to set a new goal and to reevaluate. It doesn't take that day for us. I know that, if you read, I think it's Daniel Pink has a book called When, and he talks about how these, like the first of the month, the first of the year, these inflection points are really important because they help us focus our energy and our attention. And that's really good. Use them for what they are. But it doesn't require the first of the year, the first of the month, to stop, to reflect, to refocus, and then to move. And what's next? Some really cool stuff. Some really cool stuff. But it's going to require some action.
And it requires you to have the mindset, the perspective. An eyes up mindset is keep our eyes up on the horizon. What is next? Right? This is the week of Christmas. Hopefully you guys are getting to spend it with your families somehow, some way, whether that's via Zoom or FaceTime, or if you're lucky enough to be in person. Be grateful for that opportunity. Right? And no matter whether you feel good or bad about what has happened in 2020 or the last, period of time where we've kind of all had a new normal that we've had to get used to. Look forward to what is next. See the opportunities that you have in front of you to grow, to learn, to give, to connect, and seek those out and really embrace those. Stop feeling sorry. Stop making excuses. Figure out what's next for you and move forward.
I think one of the things that helps us do that is a practice that I've put into my life, and I'm a little bit better at this than I was a year ago, and I'll be a little bit better next year than I was this year. But it's something. It's called a gratitude journal, and we do 3 gratitudes daily. Right, it's 3 things we're grateful for, and I think a cool way to help see what you're grateful for is to do it daily, right? To see the things that are coming at you that you can say, oh man, that was really great. I can be grateful for that thing. Is to put that thing into practice, to have a journal where, and it's just simple, 3 things that I'm grateful for today, right? When you wake up in the morning, when you go to bed at night, doesn't matter when you do it, but make it a habit and do it consistently. And you will start to take eyes from the negative on your feet on the ground and focus on the things that can bring you joy and gratitude in this season. We're obviously grateful as a company, as a podcast, for you guys listening, for the unbelievable support we've had throughout 2020. I'm incredibly grateful for you, John. I'm grateful for our deer hunting opportunity that you guys got to take part in, and I am grateful that you guys did it. I'm grateful that I got to be there kind of via text message. Gratitude changes a whole bunch of perspective, and it's a great thing to practice on a day-to-day basis.
Jamie, incredibly grateful for you too, and the partnership, and the fact that we get to do this together is incredibly meaningful for me. And like you said, you mentioned our listeners, grateful for the support that we've gotten. Look forward to being with you again next week, and looking forward to our what is next for us. And hopefully you're looking at kind of your year in review here, your good, the bad, and what's next, and make a plan, take a step. And as always, live eyes up.